Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I am delighted to be here with the team and to be presenting about some of the emerging findings from our project that is now nearing completion. Today's panel looks at a question that we believe is both timely and urgent. Can international mobility be a force for good, not only for individuals, but for societies? I want to start this talk with a bigger picture. Cross-border mobility and cross-border exchange across the world is increasingly under pressure. In many host countries, we are seeing tighter visa regimes, shrinking post-study work opportunities, and growing skepticism around international partnerships. In this climate, international students are often politicized, portrayed not as contributors to public good and global development, but as economic liabilities or even security risks. The public conversation about international mobility, international exchanges has narrowed. In light of these pressures, it's more important than ever to ask what the evidence actually tells us, not just about individual outcomes of international exchanges, but about societal contributions of people who come back home or stay abroad and who become members of society and who are members of society after these exchanges. So before I turn to our findings, let me very briefly tell you in simple terms what the literature tells us about the impact of international mobility and exchanges, okay? Much of the literature that exists talks about the impact of international mobility on individuals, on individual outcomes, individual skills, networks, and career progression. We see this across a variety of exchanges, student exchanges, professional exchanges, youth mobilities. Some studies also here and there talk about contributions to broader development to societies by introducing new ideas, influencing institutions, supporting civic engagement. But those studies are often fragmented or limited to single country or single program accounts. What we have lacked up until this project is a systematic comparative understanding of how international mobility translates into broader societal contributions. And as you will see in little snapshots that you will offer to you in this panel presentation, we will focus largely on returnees' home countries. So when we talk about societal contributions, we have in mind contributions to the home countries, okay? Now, in this panel, we will have 3 talks. I will start by talking about ECA-supported US State Department's ECA-sponsored mobility and what it reveals, what our study reveals about the relationship between individual experiences and systemic outcomes. Then Ju Wong will talk about the contributions of alumni of one specific ECA-supported exchange. And then Ju-Han Kwok will finish by telling us about relationship between higher education and democratization in authoritarian countries. Okay, so let me start with my talk. I ask in this talk a simple but important question. Does ECA-supported international mobility contribute to system-level development outcomes? And if so, how? Okay, so what is ECA? Some of you may not know that ECA is the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the US Department of State. It runs programs like Fulbright, IVLP, Wisely, YES, and so on and so forth. Dozens of programs across the world. These programs support students, professionals and youth to study, train, or collaborate in the US. We often think of these exchanges in terms of personal growth and personal development of those who go abroad. This research instead asks how these personal impacts translate into broader societal contributions back home. And my talk will be structured according to 3 sub-questions. So first of all, I will talk very briefly about broader quantitative links, numeric links between ECA mobility and system-level development outcomes in returnees' home countries. Then I will talk, most of my talk will be about the second. So how is it, what are the mechanisms of translating individual experiences into societal outcomes? And third, I will briefly overview the obstacles and enablers that influence these contributions, okay? So what do we mean by systemic change or societal contributions in this project? We mean broad transformations in institutions, communities, policies through advocacy, capacity building, reform, and innovation. In this big project that we ran for 3.5 years and now is nearing conclusion, we used mixed methods, okay? We used quantitative data about ECA mobilities and other publicly available data, and we also conducted 704 interviews with change agents across the world, across 70 countries. Together, this data shows us whether the change happens and, more importantly, how and under what conditions. Okay, this is the only one slide that I have about quantitative numeric data. So the quantitative analysis covers 134 countries in 45-year period, and we found very simply, and for the purposes of our short presentation, what we found is that higher concentrations of ECA alumni tend to show stronger performance across 5 key development areas. So where we have higher proportions of ECA alumni, proportions in relation to the populations of those countries, we see clear links of existence of those alumni with economic growth, population health, gender equity, democratic development, and access to basic education. We have also seen that high-income countries across the world have consistently been the largest per capita beneficiaries of ECA-sponsored mobility. At the same time, as of 2020, low-income countries surpassed middle-income countries in per capita ECA participation. These findings do not suggest that mobility alone drives development, but they show that higher concentrations of alumni are consistently linked with different quantitative outcomes that are often used to measure development. Okay. Most importantly, I will now pass on to more qualitative evidence about mechanisms of change, and I will talk about 5 different mechanisms through which individual experience translates into broader societal contributions. Mechanism 1 is about agency and reflexivity, development of agency and reflexivity in individuals when they are abroad, when they study abroad, engage in meaningful activities. What does agency mean? It's the capacity to act intentionally within the structures that surround us, okay? We have 3 different parts that we talk about, 3 different components of agency. We talk about discernment, knowing what really matters to an individual, deliberation, designing strategies that make sense in specific contexts in which individuals return, and dedication, the ability to keep going even when the system pushes back. One example is a student from South Korea who took part in a global UCRED program in the US. It's a short-term undergraduate exchange. He's completely blind, and at the time he was studying political science, okay? During his time in the US, something shifted. He saw how accessible everyday life could be for someone who is blind, how accessible his university context was and outside. He traveled alone in the US to 10 cities on his own, using different devices for accessibility and different apps, tools that, in his words, were much more widely available in the US context than in South Korea. So he says, in the US, everyone around me tried to support me. In Korea, when I said I wanted to try something new, they said, hey, it's not possible. What he gained was not just access to tech in the US, it was confidence. When he got home, he changed direction entirely. He switched from political science to computer science, because, as he put it, technology gets things done faster than politics. And since then, he has become a quiet but powerful force for change, introducing new assistive technologies to Korea's visually impaired community, helping others to live and imagine differently. That is agency in motion. Second mechanism is skills, knowledge, and expertise. Not just technical ability, but the capacity to lead, solve problems, and apply knowledge to real-world challenges. One example here comes from Mexico. A young entrepreneur from one of the country's poorest regions launched a chocolate company rooted in indigenous tradition. But it was his participation in Young Leaders of the Americas initiative, another exchange program run by US government, that changed what was possible. Through this program, he received business training, mentoring from a US-based university, and a small grant to launch a community project teaching children about chocolate, culture, and entrepreneurship. He said, this program made us believe in ourselves, made us believe in what we were doing, made us believe that there could be a way to make things different. Since then, he has trained farmers, created jobs, mentored young leaders, and built partnerships with various local and international organizations. So while this is a story about skill, it is also a story about agency that we just talked about, the belief that change is possible and the courage to act on that belief. The third mechanism is transnational social relations, the partnerships, the mentorships and networks that participants build while abroad and continue to use long after they return. These relationships are not incidental. They are often the backbone of changes they contribute to. Here, example comes from Nepal. After US exchange, one alumna returned with two things: a new understanding of inclusive leadership, going back to the skills, and a strong alumni network. She used both to change how NGOs worked with bilateral donors in Nepal. Many of these NGOs had no basic safeguarding policies, no frameworks for data protection or transparency. She introduced protocols she had seen in the US, and she activated her alumni ties to build trust and drive change from inside. She co-led a national mentorship program for more than 100 college women in the energy sector, a field where women were almost completely absent. And she pulled in alumni not just from Fulbright, but from Australia, Japan, Germany, and the private sector. She said one of the reasons why that program was very successful was because of the network that you built, the skills that you built when you were in the US, and helping other people build that network too. So we have seen across this project that social relations are strategic instruments for inclusion and for scaling the change that goes beyond the individual. Mechanism 4 is intercultural competence, the ability to act across difference with empathy, adaptability, and critical reflection. One example here comes from Moldova. A dual flex and Muskie alumna participated in two different exchanges who later served in leading positions in the Moldovan government. She told us that her mindset was shaped early at 16 through her US exchange. Studying history and civics and later development studies taught her not just how democracy works, but how to lead with integrity and navigate disagreement. Mobility gave her ability to serve as a cultural translator, to explain Western institutional expectations to Moldovan colleagues and vice versa. As she put it, it's not just about learning the right words or saying the right concept, but understanding the concepts behind these words and engaging with them systematically and meaningfully. That intercultural grounding helped her negotiate reforms with international donors, manage political alliances at home, and communicate hard truths very often without losing trust. And final mechanism is civic understanding. The ability not just to participate in public life, but to shape it, to inspire others and challenge injustice in ways that are principled but practical. We define civic understanding as a blend of socialization, learning from how institutions work, and subjectification, the ability to think critically, dissent, and lead. One example here comes from Nicaragua. After returning from his ECA-sponsored exchange, a Youth Ambassadors alumnus founded a civic platform that mobilized young people to support children in rural schools, elders in care homes, and a teenage cancer patient whose life-saving treatment had stalled. He said, "The program gave me the necessary tools to fight for my dreams, to fight for the dreams of others." He built digital campaigns, organized raffles with local businesses, and when the government shut down his project, kept working quietly, coordinating mental health services and food support without protection or publicity. So this was not just his action, it was his ethical stance. He refused to profit, refused to sensationalize the people he helped, and continued even when external funding and recognition disappeared. In a context where civil society was under suspicion, he was someone who understood both the ideals and the practical realities of democratic engagement. Now, one of the findings of our study is that mobility alone, exchanges alone, do not guarantee, of course, systemic change. Alumni return to complex systems, and the obstacles and enablers they encounter shape what they can achieve. Among the most common obstacles that we saw in this broad study were gender discrimination, often compounded by age, race, and class barriers, cultural conservatism, where new ideas were mistrusted or seen as foreign impositions, and bureaucratic inefficiencies, where even good ideas stalled due to slow, rigid, and politically charged processes. But there were also powerful enablers that supported these people to introduce new ideas and changes in their societies. And this included community support, where alumni built trust and shared ownership with local groups, access to financial resources, giving early traction to initiatives that might otherwise have stayed ideas, and political support, when alumni could align their projects with broader institutional priorities and work for changes. What stood out most was how alumni did not face just structures passively. They learned to navigate, they learned to negotiate, and sometimes even turn obstacles into entry points for change. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I will skip this one example, and this is my last slide here. To close my portion of the talk, I want to return to the question that opened this talk. Can international mobility be a force for societal change? What we have seen across 70 countries, hundreds of alumni and thousands of data points quantitatively as well as qualitatively, is that answer is yes, but not automatically. Mobility does not override context. It does not remove inequality, but it does at its best create the conditions for agency, the ability to reflect, the confidence to act, and the relations to sustain action over time. Our theory of change brings together three ideas that help explain how this happens. From critical realist perspective, we see that structures and cultures constrain, but reflexivity of an individual, the ability to rethink and act, makes change possible. From another theoretical perspective, which was called transformative learning theory, we see how people shift their assumptions when exposed to new ways of thinking. And from transnationalist theorization, we see that change does not stop at the airport when you go back home. It's sustained through global ties long after return. These are not just theories, they are lived experiences, as I have shown to you. And there are many more examples that I could share, obviously. And these are not just alumni that we have in our data set. They are active agents and actors of systemic change. And international mobility gave them a different way of seeing the world and a different way of tackling problems that they saw around them. So I will stop here now, and I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Zhi Wang, to continue with her talk that narrows down and focuses on one.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Maya. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zhi Wang, and I'm a qualitative researcher working on the project with Maya. So today I'm going to share with you our research on how wisely AFP contributes to social change in Southeast Asia. The presentation is based on our central research question: how does short-term international exchange mobility enhance student agency for making social changes? We approach this question through the lens of agency, and the case study we choose today is the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, WISELY, academic fellowship program. So together it's WISELY AFP. So this program aims to empower students and recent graduates aged from 18 to 25 from Southeast Asia to become catalysts for development in their home countries through structured 5-week academic and community-based training in the United States. Research has long highlighted the transformative potential of international higher education. Scholars have emphasized its role in self-formation and the development of reflexivity. More recently, studies have also shown that international experience enhances learners' agency not just at an individual level, but also as a driver for social change. However, most of this work has focused on long-term degree mobility, for example, like mobility for a bachelor's degree. So our study fills this gap by focusing on short-term structured programs, asking how even brief international mobility experiences can enhance students' capabilities to enact and sustain social transformation. So short-term international mobility programs usually refers to international mobility ranging from 2 weeks to under a year. And this topic has become central to university internationalization strategies. And scholars found that despite the shorter duration, these programs offer critical exposure to global perspectives to students and have been shown to improve their academic skills, intercultural adaptability, and problem-solving abilities. Scholars argue that these structured programs broaden students' worldviews, improve their employability, and often serve as springboards for future long-term mobility or career advancement. Importantly, they are also more accessible to students from diverse socio-economic backgrounds. Beyond skills and employability, so in this presentation, we argue that short-term mobility programs can also be powerful tools for enhancing students' agency for social change. As Trey and Pam put it, mobility is a process of becoming, connecting, and contributing. And in this presentation, we go one step further to conceptualize agency not just as motivation or desire to change, but as an actual capability to identify needs, make strategic decisions, and remain committed to change. So we use agency as the theoretical lens to explain our findings and frame our findings. So agency here in this presentation refers to discernment, deliberation, and dedication, three concepts just explained by Maya early in her presentation. So in terms of methodology, this presentation is based on qualitative analysis of 12 interviews with Wesley AFP alumni. And we use thematic analysis to analyze the data. So in the findings, we identified three main dimensions through which participants' agency was enhanced. First, through knowledge learning. Second, through leadership training. And third, through international connections. So first, let's look at the first findings. So Wesley significantly found enhanced participants' knowledge, enabling them to connect global insights about social changes with their local realities across three key dimensions. First, critical acquisition of knowledge for social change. Fellows, the participants in our interview, explored thematic areas like civic engagement, environmental sustainability, innovation, and governance during their Wesley AFP. Rather than accepting one-size-fits-all solution, they were encouraged to critically engage with these frameworks during their mobility. Throughout the program, participants practiced what we call discernment, like they constantly compared the US approaches with the realities of their home country. They tried to identify gaps and were encouraged to think through what could actually be adapted in their home communities. Second, comprehensive perspective for change. So fellows developed holistic thinking, learning to integrate scientific, policy-based, and grassroots perspectives during the mobility. So this process of deliberation, which refers to adapting ideas thoughtfully and strategically, is a key component to their agency enhancement. Third, they learned how to link theory to real-world application. So Wesley AFP wasn't just about academic like knowledge learning, it's also hands-on. All the fellows participated in field visits, peer dialogues, and project development during the Wesley program. So together, these experiences gave participants the tools to think globally, act locally, and make change that both informed and grounded. So all these are the hallmarks of agency enhancement. And the second research finding shows us how they develop their leadership skills. So Wesley didn't just expose participants to ideas, it also equipped them with practical leadership skills that can be translated into real-world action. One key area was project design. So fellows during the Wesley, they learn how to write proposals, define goals, and plan for impact. For many, this was the first time they saw how ideas could be structured into fundable, scalable initiatives. One participant shared how they later used these skills to win a grant from the US government for a youth literacy project back home. Equally important well communications and collaboration skills. Working in diverse groups helped participants navigate cultural differences, lead discussions, and manage group dynamics. And all these skills can be directly applicable to their work in community organization or policy advocacy. Another transformative outcome was the boost in confidence. So these experiences contribute to what we call deliberation and dedication. They helped participants not only plan effectively, but commit to sustained leadership after the program. And finally, we come to the importance of connection. So the program was the formation of connections, the networks that extended far beyond the 5-week exchange. First, many participants talk about discovering a peer community. So they developed a sense of belonging and identity to a transnational community of young leaders across Southeast Asia. So for the first time, they met young change makers from other Southeast Asian countries who shared their values and dreams. Second, alumni and institutional networks also played a major role in sustaining their efforts to make change post the mobility. After returning home, fellows still stayed in touch with the US universities, mentors, and fellow alumni. So these networks often led to collaboration, knowledge sharing, and even funding. Some went on to co-develop regional projects and receive follow-up support from for their initiatives from different institutions. Not only U.S. government, but also other international institutions. In terms of agency, so these connections nurtured their dedication. They helped participants stay committed to their social change efforts. They had a network to lean on, grow with, and build impact together. Thank you. Now let me pass this presentation to Junyan Kwang.
Thank you. My name is Jung-Young Kwak, and I'm a postdoc researcher in this research team, and I am in charge of the quantitative part of this research project. So now I will share findings from a quantitative analysis of overall student mobility covering both self-funded students and those on scholarships. So in this presentation, I will particularly discuss how domestic and international higher education influence democratization in authoritarian countries. So to understand how higher education supports democracy, we can look at it through the concept of socialization. Universities play a crucial role in teaching students socially important knowledges and values. Through lectures, discussions, and activities outside of class, students encounter diverse viewpoints, which helps them understand democratic principles. Additionally, according to Fiesta, education also fosters independence from existing social and political norms, a process known as subjectification. Marginson and Archer also suggest that higher education encourages agency, flexibility, and relationality. So higher education promotes these qualities through critical thinking and self-reflection, which helps students develop their subjectification. Consequently, higher education's roles in socialization and subjectification can enhance students' democratic engagement and development. Therefore, expanding higher education can contribute to democratization. However, the discussion about the role of higher education is often based on democratic context, where higher education is independent. Then, how does higher education work in authoritarian context? Is it possible to encourage democratic socialization within authoritarian context, where universities are often used to support the regime? Also, authoritarian countries often impose political restrictions that limit academic freedom and activism. These conditions can restrict students' agency, reflexivity, and relationality, which are important for subjectification. Based on this discussion, our first hypothesis is the expansion of domestic higher education in authoritarian regimes reinforces existing political structures rather than promoting democratization. We also look at how international student mobility affects efforts to promote democracy. Studying abroad can expose students from authoritarian countries to democratic values and practices. However, individual changes in ideology are often not enough to transform authoritarian regimes. These regimes remain stable unless opposition movements gain support, elite coalition break down, or rulers face overwhelming political or economic challenges. When conditions are favorable, returnees may contribute to democratic participation. Additionally, transnational spaces for international students help exchange political ideas, build networks, and gain knowledge that could support democratization at home. However, we must consider that this process depends on the political environment of the host country. If the host country has a democratic culture, it may positively influence democratization efforts in the students' home countries. On the other hand, if the host country has an authoritarian culture, the impact might be limited. Therefore, our second hypothesis are international student mobility to democratic countries is positively correlated with democratization in authoritarian home countries, but that to authoritarian countries may reinforce authoritarian political norms and culture at home. For this analysis, we created cross-national time series dataset covering the years from 1999 to 2018 using these all publicly available data sources. So we measure democracy as a continuous process that reflects gradual improvements or declines in democratic qualities. Our democracy index combines Polity 5 and the Freedom House Index with scores ranging from 0 to 10. The first, to classify the authoritarian and democratic countries, we used the Democracy Index in 1999 because it is the earliest year available in our dataset. So this map shows the authoritarian and democratic countries as defined by the Democracy Index in 1999. Following criteria from previous research, it is 7.0 out of 10. So we identified 84 authoritarian countries, shown in dark blue, and 67 democratic countries, shown in light blue. So using this classification, we examine how domestic higher education and international student mobility have influenced democratization in each group of countries since 1999. So domestic higher education is measured by the gross enrollment ratio in tertiary education. That is our key independent variable. And another key independent variable is international higher education that is measured by using outbound student mobility, defined as the proportion of degree-seeking students studying abroad relative to the tertiary age population. To capture the influence of the host country context, we further distinguish outbound student mobility, OSM, based on the democracy level of the host country, using a threshold score of the same 7.0 on the Democracy Index to separate democratic and authoritarian countries. We also include several control variables to account for other possible explanations for changes in democracy. Among several modeling options, actually, we use these long-run difference models, and we actually include the change variables in each by subtracting the 1999 values from those in 2018 to capture the long-term changes of the relationship between the democracy and student mobility and domestic higher education. We then used ordinary least square regression models running separate analysis for authoritarian and democratic countries. Now, let me show you the result of our analysis. The columns on the left show the result for authoritarian countries, while the columns on the right show the result for democratic countries. In the first model, we found that domestic higher education is negatively correlated with democracy in authoritarian countries, but it is positively correlated in democratic countries. In other words, expanding domestic higher education may actually lower the level of democracy in authoritarian context, while it tends to strengthen democracy in democratic context. Regarding international higher education, we observed a positive correlation with democracy, but the result was not statistically significant. In the next model, we separated OSM into two groups, outbound mobility to democratic countries and OSM to authoritarian countries. So we found that OSM to democratic countries is positively correlated with democracy in both authoritarian and democratic home countries. In contrast, OSM to authoritarian countries shows no significant correlation, and the direction of the relationship is even negative. So finally, after adding all the control variables to the model, the correlations between domestic higher education and international student mobility to democratic countries, actually these two variables remain significant, and these all support our hypothesis. So in conclusion, we found that expanding domestic higher education in authoritarian regimes can often impede the process of democratization, but in contrast, similar expansion with domestic higher education tends to foster democratic development. Second, international student mobility to democratic countries significantly promotes democratization, whereas such mobility to authoritarian countries shows no comparable effect. So these findings suggest that while higher education can foster democratic values, these effects are mediated by the prevailing social norms and political culture. So that's it. So thank you for listening to our presentation.